The Triforce. Aside from the sign of Deathly Hallows or the symbol of the Galactic Rebellion, no other icon has been worn on nerds' t-shirts more. Today we will explore all things Triforce. What powers it? What rules does it follow? Its history and lore, its relationship with the protagonists and antagonists of the Zelda franchise, what it says about the deities who created it, and finally, we unveil a grand, unified theory of the Triforce that unites the games. This time, on Hyrule. Before time began, before life or spirits existed, there were three goddesses. Using their divine powers, these goddesses created the kingdom of Hyrule and created order in the chaos. They also left behind an object, the physical manifestation of their ultimate power. Known as the Golden Triangle, the gift of the gods, or the great power of Hyrule, the Triforce is made up of three triangles connected at 3 points, forming a larger triangle. The placement of the triangles in the Triforce has significance, with each piece representing a virtue of the goddess who created it. The top triangle is the Triforce of Power, from the goddess Din. The bottom left is the Triforce of Wisdom, from the goddess Nehru. The bottom right is the Triforce of Courage, from the goddess Furor. Together, these pieces make up the ultimate source of power in the Zelda universe, the Triforce. Depending on which legend or mythology you believe, the Triforce was either formed with intention and left to the lower goddesses Hylia, or it was formed as the natural result of the goddesses leaving the world of Hyrule. Some believe the goddesses themselves trusted the Triforce to Hylia. Some believe the ancient citizens of Hyrule found the object and gave it to Hylia. The Great Deku Tree tells Link in Ocarina of Time that the goddesses also created a parallel dimension to Hyrule. That was the very place from which they departed the world to return to the heavens. This realm, separate from Hyrule, is called the Sacred Realm, and it's where the Triforce is located in most of the games. The insignia is found in the architecture, the art, and the weaponry in basically every age of Hyrule, across hundreds of thousands of years and across multiple timelines. The lore surrounding the sacred object is vast, varied, and even reaches beyond the kingdom of Hyrule. But what is the purpose of this sacred object? It is said that the Triforce will grant its wielder any wish they truly desire through the power of the goddesses. At first glance, the Triforce seems to grant temporary omnipotence to its holder, but the object has only been known to have been used to its full extent 4 times in the entire history of Hyrule. That's because the Triforce is not easily obtained, and even less easily used once in the wielder's possession. The wielder themselves cannot be a god or a goddess, which might be why Hylia never deployed the Triforce against the forces of evil that arose in the First Great War of Hyrule. The wielder must desire access to all 3 parts equally, or, said like the ancients, the wielder cannot have an unbalanced heart. If the wielder truly only desires one aspect of the Triforce, they will only obtain the power of one of the pieces of the Triforce. This is fundamental to the nature and purpose of the Triforce. It was designed to guard against those who would use it to destroy balance in Hyrule. Said more simply, the main purpose of the Triforce is to separate the powers and keep balance among the creations of the goddesses. It's important to acknowledge that the goddesses have obfuscated goals and left no specific instructions of doctrines behind to help guide the people of Hyrule. We, like the citizens of Hyrule, have to guess their intentions by observing their actions and by understanding the nature of the Triforce. We know the goddesses created Hyrule, and they believe in creation and in life. We know they either intentionally or unintentionally left the Triforce behind. We know they only have explicitly intervened in Hyrule twice in the entire history of the kingdom. We know the goddesses banished the interlopers to the Twilight Realm when they attempted to enter the Sacred Realm and obtain the Triforce with diffuse shadow. We know the goddesses granted Ganon's wish to destroy the people of Hyrule by flooding the kingdom and trapping Ganon and the Triforce beneath the waves. These are the only explicit actions of the goddesses of Hyrule. Let's look closer at the 2 times they interceded in the events of Hyrule and try to understand why they chose to act on those occasions. We learn that sometime after the events of Skyward Sword, a tribe of dark magic wielders came to Hyrule. These were called the Interlopers, and they carried with them the dark power and magic of the Shadow. These dark interlopers sought to enter the Sacred Realm, to take the Triforce for themselves. This sparked a massive civil war, and resulted in the goddesses banishing the interlopers to the Twilight Realm, a place consumed in shadow. The goddesses also split the power of the shadow into several different pieces. The theme of the goddesses splitting powerful objects in order to limit their potential is one that occurs across all the Zelda games. If the interlopers had taken possession of the Triforce, they would have possessed the power of the Shadow and the power of the Triforce. Such consolidation of power would upset the balance of Hyrule, and violate the wishes of the creators of the Triforce. We learn in Wind Waker that the goddesses granted Ganon's wish for the destruction of the land. Normally, the Triforce would not discriminate the wish and the wielder's intentions. When the Triforce is used in other games, for instance, the goddesses themselves do not personally grant the wishes, like they do for Ganon. Ganon had learned how to wield the Triforce in the time between Ocarina and Wind Waker, but the goddesses managed to grant Ganon's wish while still maintaining balance for the land of Hyrule. They sent a flood upon the land of Hyrule, and while the Hylians retreated to the top of the mountains, Ganon and his legions and the Triforce were sealed away beneath the ocean. But perhaps more interesting of when the goddesses choose to intervene in the affairs of Hyrule is when they chose not to. In the age of Hylia and Demise, preceding the events of Skyward Sword, the First Great War caused the Hylians to retreat above the clouds. Why wouldn't the goddesses have intervened in such a desperate time? Perhaps because the balance of power was still balanced between the forces of darkness and death and the forces of light and life. When Ganondorf entered the Sacred Realm and tried to take the Triforce in the events of Ocarina of Time, why wouldn't the goddesses intervene? Well, in the events of Ocarina, the Triforce was never actually fully obtained by anyone. The Triforce splits into the 3 pieces based on the wielders in Hyrule at the time, who were worthy of the various powers of the pieces of the Triforce. The Triforce of Courage went to Link, the Triforce of Power to Ganondorf, and the Triforce of Wisdom to Sheik, Zelda. And after the events of Ocarina of Time in the adult timeline, the Triforce is split even further. Before the events of Wind Waker, the Triforce of Courage is split into 8 shards and spread across the ocean, and the Triforce of Courage splits into 2. Consider the separation of powers during the events of Wind Waker. The Triforce of Power remains a single piece, the Triforce of Wisdom is a dual piece, and the Triforce of Courage is in 8 separate pieces. This power structure mirrors the U.S. government's separation of powers, with 1 executive, 2 legislative bodies, and 9 Supreme Court justices. This is all to say that based on the 3 known acts of the goddesses, the best deduction of their discernible aim is to simply separate power. By separating power in Hyrule, order and purpose is given to the goddesses' creations. By never allowing the consolidation of power, the goddesses ensure that Hyrule continues to grow through cycles of prosperity and growth and cycles of decline and destruction. This helps explain why the 3 wielders of the pieces of the Triforce echo each other across time and across entries in the franchise. From the events of Ocarina of Time on, Zelda inherits the Triforce of Wisdom, as it passes in the female line of the royal family. A line that can be traced back to Hylia herself. Ganon obtains the Triforce of Power through deception and brute force. Link obtains the Triforce of Courage through his acts of valor and self-sacrifice in each entry in the franchise. Each piece of the Triforce seems to be earned only through acts that the piece deems worthy. For Zelda, the wisdom she aspires to in order to rule makes her worthy. For Ganon, the power he amasses in order to subjugate makes him worthy. And for Link, the courage he displays in his actions in defending the innocent and the weak make him worthy. As anyone who has played a plurality of the games can see, the Triforce has perpetuated a cycle of struggle between the chosen wielders of the separate powers of the Triforce time and time again. To understand the nature of the Triforce, it's vital to frame it within philosophical and religious boundaries. The Triforce, very importantly, is not actually omnipotent. The world of Hyrule and the universe it exists in is not animated solely by the power of the three goddesses. We know Lorule had their own Triforce, which was destroyed and rebuilt. We know great spirits and other gods exist in the realm. We know that Majora's Mask is not animated through the power of the Triforce. We know that Calamity Ganon did not return in Breath of the Wild through the power of the Triforce. We know that dark powers exist in Hyrule and beyond, as practiced by the interlopers who use the power of the Shadow to try and obtain the Triforce. We know that the imprisoned arose from the earth with all manner of monsters, all while Hylia was in possession of the Triforce. The Triforce is the greatest of all powers, but it is not the source of all power in the universe. The Triforce is also not monolithic in form or in function. It's important to remember that the earliest game where we see the Triforce split is Ocarina of Time. The Triforce only splits when someone who tries to wield it only desires one aspect of its power. The piece most desired is given, but the other pieces are then free to find those most worthy to wield them, all in the name of balance. Because Ganondorf had an unbalanced heart when he took possession of the Triforce split. In many ways, the Triforce is the inversion of the Christian idea of the Trinity. In a majority of Christian churches, the idea of God as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost is described as one God, three forms. The Triforce is one form of three goddesses. Somewhat interestingly, the forces of evil in the Zelda games do fit the Trinity model of God perfectly. Demise acts as the father of all evil and monsters, and is responsible for the original curse placed on men. Ganondorf is the physical manifestation of Demise, a demon made into man. Ganon is the spirit of evil and malice, manifesting itself as a monster, a phantom, or a possessed and rage-filled boar. The biblical similarities of this dark trinity to the mythology of Satan is clear: one evil god in three forms. Finally, we come to the grand unifying theory about the Triforce. But first, a little Zelda fan history. There was a common theory in the Zelda fan base back in the days of Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker. The theory is that of a Tetraforce. On the Hyrulian shield in Ocarina of Time, there was a fourth golden triangle, this one facing down. People took this to mean that there was a fourth piece of the Triforce. This gave rise to the belief that there was a fourth goddess, perhaps a goddess of time, a goddess of sand, or even Zelda herself was the fourth goddess. This theory was discredited by Nintendo very explicitly on multiple occasions. See how they named Tetra in Wind Waker as a little bit of a tease to the fanbase about the whole theory? Or how Hylia has become the fourth goddess in Skyward Sword? But if we ask ourselves what the relationship could be between the Triforce and the powers of Demise, Ganondorf, and Ganon, we must consider the two to be linked in some way. Demise never obtains a Triforce, yet he wields magic in his sword, his appearance, and his ability to open portals to other planes of existence. Ganondorf was an immensely powerful sorcerer with vast mystical resources before he ever laid hands on the Triforce of Power. Ganon appears in Breath of the Wild despite the fact that Zelda is the sole possessor of the Triforce at that point. Their power seemingly does not come from the Triforce, and their desire for the Triforce is simply to consolidate their already immense power. But the Dark Trinity is too closely tied to the Triforce for their power to be unrelated to the Triforce. The unified theory of the Triforce asserts that the empty space of inverted triangle in the Triforce is the source of the power of the shadow. The goddesses are depicted as leaving the Triforce in the sky's sacred realm. The light shining from the Triforce would surely cast a shadow onto the earth below. The Hyrulians escaped to the sky prior to the events of Skyward Sword, and later the Triforce was found in the Sky Keep on Skyloft. Demise was said to have arisen with his army of evil monsters from the earth as forces of darkness. The Imprisoned is also depicted as having risen from beneath the ground, with a dark shadowy substance all around it. The power of the Triforce's shadow gave rise to these powers of darkness. We can see how the nature and purpose of the Triforce would necessitate such a power. The brilliance of the light of the Triforce must be balanced, for every action a reaction. As Luke says, powerful light, powerful dark. The forces of shadow are found throughout the Zelda franchise, usually aligned or connected to the Dark Trinity in some fashion. Most notably, Shadow Link, the Twilly and the Twilight Realm, the Yiga clan, Lorule. The forces of shadow were at one time consolidated into an object, much like the forces of light are consolidated in the Triforce. Magic wielders fused all the powers of the shadow into a single weapon, the fused shadow. Much like the Triforce can be used for evil purposes, so too could the fused shadow be made to do good. The fused shadow serves balance, just as the Triforce does. Midna uses the fused shadow to oppose Ganon, who had both the Triforce of Power and, through possession of Zelda, the Triforce of Wisdom. Understanding the power of the shadow of the Triforce helps us interpret some of the larger mysteries of Breath of the Wild. Since Zelda is the sole possessor of the Triforce, we must assume the Triforce had been united against so many generations before the Zelda of Breath of the Wild. Zelda uses the full power of the Triforce twice in the game to oppose the power of Ganon and then to seal him away. Yet in the trailer for Breath of the Wild 2, we see malice flowing from the mummified Ganondorf. Later in the trailer, we even see what looks like a shadow of demise on the cave wall. If Zelda has the full power of the Triforce, how can Ganondorf and Malice still have power? To me, the Dark Trinity has always represented a thirst for unlimited power. They always yearn to add more to the power they have. They wait in the shadows behind Zant, behind Bati, bowing as a Gerudo emissary to the King of Hyrule, biding their time using the power of the shadow until they can lay their hands on the Triforce of Power and then on the whole unfixed Triforce. There is only one thing that ever stands in their way successfully. Not Link, not Zelda. The Master Sword. The Master Sword began its life as the goddess sword, made by the goddess Hylia for her chosen hero. It only gained the power to repel evil after it was tempered in the sacred flames in Skyward Sword. The game goes out of its way to tell us that Din's flame, in particular, imbued the sword with the power to repel evil. Remember that Din is the goddess of power, and is thus the most closely aligned to the Triforce of Power. The Triforce of Power is the piece that is always associated with the Dark Trinity. Zelda is never able to defeat Ganon or Ganondorf, only injure them with arrows of light or seal them away using her sealing power. Link cannot defeat the Dark Trinity through valor or courage alone. In multiple games, Link is defeated by Ganondorf without the full power of the Master Sword. Only the Master Sword was able to defeat Demise in Skyward Sword. Only the Master Sword was able to kill Ganon with a killing blow to the head in Ocarina of Time. Only the Master Sword turned Ganondorf into stone in Wind Waker. The Master Sword is effective against the Dark Trinity because the power of Din is effective against a creature wielding the Triforce of Power. In Breath of the Wild, the Master Sword is not used to defeat Ganon. This is why many have speculated that Breath of the Wild was either a departure from the Triforce and Master Sword mythology, or that the end of the game was not a victory at all, but rather just a precursor to the real battle to come. The Master Sword is also heavily implied to be a piece of technology, as evidenced by Fi in Skyward Sword. The purple hue of the hilt could be interpreted to be a combination of the powers of Din, red, and the powers of Nehru, blue. With Link wielding such a sword, all the powers of the Triforce are represented, and the power of the Shadow would stand no chance. Next time on Hyrule, we'll discuss how the Triforce was fused back into a single piece, how the royal family came to possess the Triforce, and discuss the last hero. Special thanks to Zeltic, Nintendo Black Crisis, and Nintendo World Report TV for their theories and videos that inspired this one.